The recruitment station on Proxima Base buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of species gathered for the Galactic Command's elite sniper program. Commander Zixith, a towering Altarian with crystalline skin that reflected the station's harsh lights, reviewed the applications with growing amusement. His 4 eyes scanned through profiles of the galaxy's finest marksmen, Kethran warriors who could hit targets from orbit, Vexte hunters whose natural electromagnetic vision could track prey across star systems, and Mordak assassins whose cybernetic enhancements made them living weapons. Then he saw it. A single application from Earth, submitted by someone called Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez of the United States Marine Corps. Zixith's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. The data was almost insulting. A baseline human claiming proficiency with primitive projectile weapons, operating without any genetic modifications or technological augmentation. Her longest confirmed kill was listed at 2,147 meters using something called a 50 caliber rifle. The Altarian had to convert the measurement twice, certain there was an error. "Look at this," Zixith called to his aide, Lieutenant Corvan, a sleek serpentine whose scales shifted color with emotion. "The humans have sent us a primitive. She uses chemical propellants and metal projectiles. No plasma enhancement, no quantum targeting, not even basic neural interfacing." Corvan's scales rippled with amusement as he examined the file. "Perhaps it's some kind of joke? I've heard humans have an odd sense of humor. Her weapon specifications are archaic. The projectile travels at barely 850 meters per second. My grandmother's hunting rifle from 3 centuries ago was faster." The other recruiters gathered around, their various forms of laughter filling the chamber. A crystalline being named Shardex pointed one of his diamond-hard appendages at the screen. "She doesn't even have enhanced vision. How does she acquire targets beyond visual range? Does she throw rocks and hope for the best?" Commander Zixith was about to reject the application entirely when his superior, Admiral Kethmara, entered the chamber. The ancient Kethran warrior had scales like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with inner fire. Veterans spoke of her legendary marksmanship in hushed tones. She had once eliminated an enemy fleet commander from 7 light minutes away using a stellar rail cannon. "What's causing such merriment?" Admiral Kethmara's voice carried the authority of someone who had fought in the Void Wars. "A human application, Admiral," Zixith explained, struggling to contain his amusement. "Completely unmodified, using primitive kinetic weapons. It's almost charming how naive they are about galactic warfare standards." Admiral Kethmara studied the file for a long moment. Her eyes narrowed as she read Elena Rodriguez's service record. 3 tours in hostile environments, 47 confirmed eliminations, multiple commendations for valor under fire. But what caught her attention wasn't the numbers, it was the circumstances. Each kill had been made under extreme stress, often while protecting civilian populations or extraction teams. "I see someone who achieved precision under pressure using inferior tools," the Admiral said quietly. "That suggests either exceptional skill or remarkable adaptability." "Perhaps both." The other recruiters exchanged glances. Zixith's confidence wavered slightly, but he pressed on. "With respect, Admiral, her longest shot wouldn't even qualify as medium range by our standards. The Vexti candidate achieved a confirmed kill at 47,000 kilometers using ion beam technology. This human's record is barely worth mentioning." Admiral Kethmara's expression remained neutral, and yet she eliminated targets that posed immediate threats to her unit, using weapons with no smart targeting, no environmental compensation, and no predictive algorithms. She calculated wind speed, bullet drop, and target movement using only training and instinct. "Exactly my point," Zixith said, misreading her tone. "Primitive methods that have no place in modern warfare." The Admiral's scales darkened slightly, a sign that any veteran would recognize as dangerous. "I've fought humans before, Commander, during the border conflicts in the Outer Rim. Never underestimate a species that has survived by killing each other for millions of years. They have insights into warfare that our more civilized races have forgotten." Despite the warning, the recruitment board remained skeptical. The Mordak representative, a cybernetic creature more machine than flesh, spoke with electronic precision. "Admiral, surely you don't suggest we waste a slot on this primitive when we have candidates who can interface directly with orbital targeting systems?" "I suggest," Admiral Kethmara said, her voice carrying a hint of steel, "that we remember the purpose of this program. We're not just training marksmen for standard warfare. We're preparing specialists for situations where technology fails, where adaptability matters more than raw firepower." She paused, studying each face in the room. The hegemony has been developing new interference technologies. Quantum scramblers that render our smart weapons useless, EMP fields that shut down cybernetic enhancements. In those conditions, which candidate would you prefer? The one dependent on technology, or the one who has spent years making impossible shots with nothing but skill and determination? The room fell silent. None of them had considered the implications of fighting an enemy that could neutralize their technological advantages. Commander Zixith felt his certainty cracking. "Even so, Admiral, her physical capabilities are limited. No enhanced reflexes, no reinforced skeleton, no improved cardiovascular system. She's baseline human in every measurable way." "Which means," Admiral Kethamara replied, "that every achievement in her record was earned through pure skill and determination. No technological crutches, no genetic advantages. Just training, experience, and the kind of predatory instinct that made humans the apex species on their world." She gestured to the holographic display showing Elena's service record. "Look at the psychological profile. She operates effectively under extreme stress, maintains accuracy despite fatigue and fear, and has repeatedly chosen to engage superior forces to protect others. These aren't the statistics of someone playing with technological advantages. This is someone who has faced death repeatedly and emerged victorious through skill alone." The other recruiters began to reconsider. Admiral Kethamara had earned her reputation through centuries of combat. If she saw potential in this human candidate, perhaps they were missing something crucial. "Very well," Commander Zixith said reluctantly. "We'll include her in the program, but I maintain that she'll be eliminated in the first week of training." Admiral Kethamara's expression remained neutral, but those who knew her well might have detected the slightest hint of anticipation. Perhaps. Or perhaps we're about to learn something about the nature of precision under pressure. As the meeting concluded and the recruiters dispersed, none of them noticed the Admiral's quiet smile. She had read between the lines of Elena Rodriguez's service record, seeing details that the others had missed. This human had already proven she could adapt to impossible circumstances and emerge victorious. The question wasn't whether she would succeed in the program. The question was how much she would change it. Elena Rodriguez stepped off the transport ship onto Nexus Station, the galaxy's premier military training facility. The artificial gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth standard, and the air carried the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere mixed with ozone from the massive energy shields protecting the station. Around her, dozens of the galaxy's most elite marksmen moved with predatory grace, their various forms of enhancement immediately apparent. A Kethran warrior named Silthak towered nearly 3 meters tall, his obsidian scales gleaming under the station's lights. Elena watched him casually lift the equipment case that would have required 3 humans to move, his genetically enhanced musculature making the task effortless. Nearby, a Vextai called Morex demonstrated his electromagnetic vision by accurately describing the contents of sealed containers from across the hangar bay. The crystalline being she'd seen in the briefing materials, Shardex moved with mechanical precision. His diamond-hard body was essentially a living weapon, immune to most environmental hazards and capable of interfacing directly with targeting computers. When he spoke, his voice resonated with harmonic frequencies that could shatter glass at close range. Elena adjusted her equipment bag and tried not to feel overwhelmed. Her gear was laughably simple compared to what surrounded her. A custom rifle that was essentially an upgraded version of weapons used centuries ago, basic optics that required manual adjustment, and ammunition that relied on chemical propellants. She felt like someone who had brought a knife to a nuclear war. "So you're the primitive everyone's talking about," a voice said behind her. Elena turned to see a Mordak assassin studying her with cybernetic eyes that glowed with internal displays. Half of his head had been replaced with technological components, and his left arm was entirely artificial, bristling with hidden weapons and sensors. "Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez," she replied, extending her hand in the human custom. The Mordak, who introduced himself as Nexar, looked at her hand with puzzlement before awkwardly attempting the gesture. His artificial fingers could have crushed her bones without effort, but he modulated his grip with mechanical precision. "I am curious," Nexar said, his voice carrying electronic undertones. "How does one achieve precision without technological assistance?" My targeting systems can calculate trajectory, environmental factors, and target movement in nanoseconds. How do you compensate for variables you cannot measure? Elena considered the question seriously. Training and experience. You learn to read the environment, wind patterns from how vegetation moves, temperature gradients from heat shimmer, humidity from how light refracts. Your body becomes the sensor array. Nexer's cybernetic components hummed quietly as he processed this information. Inefficient. Prone to error. How do you maintain accuracy when biological systems become fatigued or stressed? You learn to work with it instead of against it, Elena replied. Stress affects everyone differently. Some people shake, others freeze, some get tunnel vision. You train until you understand your own responses and can compensate for them. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their instructor, Master Sergeant Colthus, a grizzled veteran from a species Elena didn't recognize. His skin was gray and scarred, marked with the kind of damage that came from surviving battles that should have been fatal. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had killed more enemies than most soldiers had ever seen. Listen carefully, Colthus began, his eyes scanning the assembled candidates. You are here because someone believes you have the potential to become more than just accurate shooters. Any fool with enhanced reflexes and smart ammunition can hit a stationary target. We're training you to eliminate threats under impossible conditions. He gestured to a holographic display showing various combat scenarios. Urban environments where collateral damage must be avoided. Hostile atmospheres where technology fails. Boarding actions where every shot must count. Situations where the difference between success and catastrophe is measured in millimeters. Elena noticed that several candidates shifted uncomfortably as the scenarios became more complex. These weren't the clean, technological solutions they were accustomed to. These were messy, unpredictable situations that required adaptation and improvisation. Your first exercise will be simple, Colthus continued. Standard target engagement at 1,000 meters. 3 shots, best grouping wins. Easy enough that even a primitive should be able to participate. The comment drew snickers from several candidates, but Elena noticed that a few others remained silent. Admiral Kethamara's warning about underestimating humans must have reached some ears. The range was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Holographic targets could appear anywhere within a vast chamber that simulated various environments. Gravity could be adjusted, atmospheric conditions modified, and environmental hazards introduced with computer precision. It was a marksman's paradise and nightmare combined. Silthak went first, his enhanced physiology allowing him to shoulder a weapon that looked more like a small cannon. His first shot vaporized the center of the target from 1,000 meters. His second and third shots landed within millimeters of the first, creating a grouping so tight it appeared to be a single hole. The other candidates followed, each demonstrating the precision that had earned them selection for the program. Morex used his electromagnetic vision to compensate for minute atmospheric variations. Shardex interfaced directly with his weapon's targeting computer, achieving mechanical precision that bordered on perfection. When Elena's turn arrived, the chamber fell silent. Even the instructor seemed curious to see how the primitive human would perform against galactic standards. Elena approached the firing line with her simple rifle, checking the weapon with practiced movements that spoke of years of training. She took her position and began the process that had been drilled into her over countless hours of practice. Wind speed and direction from the movement of holographic atmospheric indicators. Range estimation confirmed by the electronic display. Breathing rhythm slowed and controlled. Heart rate managed through meditation techniques taught by instructors who had never heard of quantum targeting. Her first shot struck just outside the target's center ring. Not a miss, but not the precision demonstrated by her competitors. Several candidates exchanged glances that clearly said, as expected. Elena adjusted her scope with manual controls, compensating for what the shot had revealed about current conditions. Her second shot moved closer to center, and her third shot struck dead center of the target. Acceptable, Colthus said, though his tone suggested mild disappointment. Your grouping is adequate for basic qualification, though well behind the standard set by your peers. Elena nodded acknowledgement, but privately she was satisfied. She had achieved what she intended, a respectable showing that wouldn't draw too much attention while she learned how her equipment performed in this environment. The smart money was on making herself seem competent but unremarkable while she studied her competition. As the candidates moved to the next phase of evaluation, Elena noticed that several were already dismissing her as a non-threat. That was exactly what she wanted. In her experience, overconfident enemies made mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. What none of them realized was that Elena had been holding back significantly. The grouping she had achieved was deliberately spread to appear adequate rather than exceptional. Her real capability would remain hidden until the moment she needed it most. The game had begun, and Elena Rodriguez was playing by rules her competitors didn't even know existed. The first week of training pushed every candidate to their limits, but in different ways than Elena had expected. Rather than simple marksmanship exercises, Master Sergeant Colthus designed scenarios that tested adaptability under stress. Urban combat simulations where civilians could appear in the line of fire without warning. Orbital insertion training where candidates had to engage targets while falling through atmosphere. Ship-to-ship combat where the platform itself was under attack and moving unpredictably. Elena watched her fellow candidates struggle with these challenges. Their technological advantages became liabilities when conditions changed rapidly. Orcs's electromagnetic vision was useless when the simulation introduced interference fields. Shardex's computer interface malfunctioned when subjected to quantum static. Nexar's targeting algorithms couldn't adapt fast enough when gravity shifted mid-shot. Meanwhile, Elena found herself oddly comfortable with the chaos. Years of operating in hostile environments had taught her to expect the unexpected. When her scope was damaged during a simulated artillery barrage, she switched to iron sights and continued engaging targets. When atmospheric interference made electronic ranging impossible, she estimated distances using techniques that predated spaceflight. Interesting, Colthus noted during the debrief after a particularly challenging exercise. Most of you performed admirably under standard conditions, but when we introduced complications, your performance degraded significantly, except for one candidate. Elena kept her expression neutral as several eyes turned toward her. She had no desire to become the center of attention, but her consistent performance was starting to draw notice. Rodriguez, the instructor continued, you maintained accuracy despite equipment failures and environmental challenges. How? Backup systems, Elena replied simply. In my unit, we always planned for equipment failure. When your primary optics fail, you use backup sights. When electronic systems malfunction, you fall back on manual calculations. When technology betrays you, you rely on training. Silthak's scales darkened with irritation. Primitive methods are inherently less accurate. Our technology exists to eliminate human error. And when that technology fails, Elena asked mildly, what eliminates technological error? The question hung in the air like a challenge. None of the enhanced candidates had a ready answer because the scenario had never seriously occurred to them. Their entire approach to warfare was built on technological superiority. The second week introduced psychological pressure designed to break candidates who couldn't handle stress. Scenarios where civilian casualties were inevitable if targets weren't eliminated with perfect precision. Time-critical shots where hesitation meant mission failure. Moral dilemmas where the right choice wasn't clear. Elena noticed that her competitors began showing cracks under this pressure. Morek second-guessed himself when forced to make split-second decisions without computer assistance. Shardex's mechanical nature became a disadvantage when scenarios required emotional intelligence to predict human behavior. Nexar's cybernetic enhancements couldn't process the moral complexity of choosing between competing objectives. During one particularly brutal exercise, candidates were required to eliminate a terrorist leader who was using children as human shields. The shot was technically possible, but required threading a bullet through a gap barely larger than the projectile itself. Miss by millimeters in any direction and an innocent child would die. One by one, the enhanced candidates failed. Their technology made them precise, but it also made them rigid. When faced with a situation that required adapting to factors their systems couldn't quantify, they hesitated or overcomplicated their approach. Elena studied the scenario for several minutes, noting wind patterns, target behavior, and the movement of the children. When she finally took her shot, it was with the same calm precision she had demonstrated as a child, hunting with her grandfather in the mountains of Colorado. The bullet found its mark with surgical precision, eliminating the threat without harming any civilians. How? Nexar demanded after the simulation ended. My calculation showed a 73% probability of collateral damage. How did you achieve certainty? Elena considered her answer carefully. I didn't achieve certainty. I accepted risk and managed it through training and intuition. You calculated odds. I read the situation. Explain the difference, Silthak growled, his frustration evident. Your computer tells you what the mathematical probabilities are based on measurable factors, Elena explained. But there are always unmeasurable factors. The way someone flinches when they're about to move. The micro-expressions that indicate fear or determination. The subtle changes in posture that suggest which direction someone will dodge. She paused, trying to put into words something that had become instinctive through years of practice. You can't quantify everything that matters in combat. Sometimes you have to trust your gut based on experience you can't consciously access. Colthus had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Continue, Rodriguez. On Earth we have predators that hunt in ways your species might find primitive, Elena said. A hawk doesn't calculate wind speed and trajectory when it dives for prey. It integrates thousands of variables through evolved instincts and learned behavior. The result is precision that no computer can match because it adapts in real time to factors that can't be predicted. The instructor nodded slowly. And you consider yourself such a predator? Elena met his gaze steadily. All humans are predators, sir. We just got really good at it. By the third week, the candidate pool had been reduced from 50 to 12. The eliminated candidates weren't failures in traditional terms. They were all exceptional marksmen by Galactic standards. But they had been eliminated because they couldn't adapt when their advantages were stripped away. The remaining candidates were the truly elite, and Elena noticed a shift in how they regarded her. The dismissive amusement was gone, replaced by wary respect. She was no longer the primitive human who had somehow stumbled into their program. She was a competitor who had proven herself under conditions that had broken beings with superior physical capabilities. Next week, we begin the real training, Cultus announced. Everything you've experienced so far has been evaluation. We needed to understand your capabilities and limitations. Now we'll push you beyond both. Elena felt a familiar excitement building in her chest. This was what she had come for. Not to prove that humans belonged among the galactic elite, but to test herself against challenges that would have been impossible on Earth. She had spent years being the best among humans. Now she had the chance to discover what that really meant on a galactic scale. As the candidates dispersed to their quarters, Elena noticed Admiral Kethamara observing from the observation deck. The ancient warrior's expression was unreadable, but Elena sensed approval in her posture. The Admiral had gambled on human potential, and so far that gamble was paying off. But Elena knew the real test was yet to come. Everything so far had been preparation. Soon she would face challenges that would require every skill she had developed and some she had yet to discover. The thought didn't frighten her. It excited her in a way that few things ever had. She was ready to hunt among the stars. The fourth week brought the advanced training modules, and with them a revelation that changed everything Elena thought she knew about galactic warfare. Master Sergeant Colthus led the remaining 12 candidates into a classified briefing room where Admiral Kethamara waited with the expression of grim determination. What you learn here does not leave this room, the Admiral began without preamble. For the past 6 months, our forces have been engaged in skirmishes with an enemy we're calling the hegemony. They possess technology that neutralizes our standard advantages in ways we never anticipated. A holographic display showed footage from recent battles, and Elena felt her blood chill as she watched galactic command forces being systematically outmaneuvered. Ships that should have been impregnable were disabled by weapons that seemed to ignore shielding. Elite troops with cybernetic enhancements moved sluggishly, as if their augmentations had become dead weight. Quantum interference fields, Admiral Kethamara explained. They scramble electronic systems, disrupt computer targeting, and can even interfere with cybernetic implants. In the affected zones, our technological superiority becomes a liability. Silthak's scales darkened as he processed the implications. Without our enhancement, we're fighting with primitive methods. Exactly, the Admiral replied. Which is why this program has become critical to our survival. We need specialists who can operate effectively when our technology fails. Elena studied the battle footage with professional interest. She recognized the tactical patterns. Forces trained to rely on technological advantages suddenly finding themselves fighting blind. It was like watching a modern army try to fight with medieval weapons. The confusion and fear were obvious. Show them the Kepler station footage, Cultist suggested quietly. The hologram shifted to show a space station under siege. Elena watched as hegemony forces systematically eliminated the station's defenders. But what made her blood run cold wasn't the efficiency of the attack. It was the precision of the enemy marksmen operating in the quantum interference zones. They adapted, she said quietly. They trained their forces to fight without technological assistance. Admiral Kethmara nodded grimly. Our intelligence suggests they deliberately developed this technology after studying our tactics. They knew our reliance on enhancement would become a weakness if properly exploited. The briefing continued for another hour, revealing the scope of the threat. The hegemony wasn't just another enemy faction. They were an existential threat to the galactic order. Their ability to neutralize technological advantages meant that centuries of military doctrine had become obsolete, almost overnight. When the briefing ended, Elena remained behind as the other candidates filed out. Something about the footage bothered her, but she couldn't identify what. A question, Rodriguez? Admiral Kethmara asked. The targeting patterns in the Kepler station footage, Elena said slowly. The enemy marksmen were precise, but their shots followed predictable patterns. Like they were following programmed instructions rather than adapting to the situation. The Admiral's eyes sharpened with interest. Explain. Elena called up the footage again, pointing to specific enemy positions. Here, when station security changed tactics and began using improvised cover, the enemy snipers continued engaging from positions that had become disadvantageous. A human sniper would have relocated immediately. You're suggesting they still rely on technology? Just different technology? I'm suggesting they trained to fight without enhanced targeting systems, but they're still thinking like machines, Elena replied. They learned to compensate for the loss of computer assistance, but they never learned to think like predators. Admiral Kethmara considered this for a long moment. That's a significant tactical insight. If true, it suggests their adaptation isn't as complete as we feared. Elena nodded, but privately she was thinking beyond tactics. If the hegemony had trained their forces to operate without technological enhancement, they were essentially trying to fight like humans without understanding what made humans effective. They had copied the methods without grasping the mindset. The real training began the next day with scenarios that simulated quantum interference conditions. All electronic systems were disabled, forcing candidates to rely on manual calculations and instinctive judgment. The results were predictable. Most of the enhanced candidates struggled dramatically when their augmentations were neutralized. Nexar's cybernetic targeting systems became deadweight, forcing him to learn iron sight shooting for the first time in his military career. Orcs discovered that his electromagnetic vision was useless for normal targeting when it was electronically suppressed. Shardex found that his computer interface capabilities meant nothing when there were no computers to interface with. Elena, meanwhile, found herself in her element. The conditions weren't significantly different from what she had trained under on Earth. If anything, the reduced gravity and controlled atmosphere made shooting easier than the variable conditions she was accustomed to. This is impossible, Silthak snarled after missing a target he should have eliminated easily. How do you calculate trajectory without computer assistance? Elena demonstrated the manual calculations she had learned as a child. Wind speed estimated from environmental cues, range determined by visual references and mathematical formulas learned by rote. Bullet drop compensated through experience and practice. It was slow compared to computer targeting, but it was reliable under any conditions. You memorized all these calculations? Morrex asked incredulously. We drill them until they become automatic, Elena explained. Like learning to walk or ride a bicycle. Eventually, you don't think about the individual steps. What fascinated her was watching how the enhanced candidates adapted to their limitations. Some, like Nexar, approached the problem mechanically, trying to replace their computer systems with manual versions of the same processes. Others, like Silthak, relied on their enhanced physical capabilities to compensate for reduced accuracy. But a few, Elena noticed, began to understand something deeper. They stopped trying to replicate their technological advantages and started learning to think differently about the problem itself. By the end of the week, the candidate pool had been reduced to 6. Those who remained weren't necessarily the most enhanced or technologically advanced. They were the ones who could adapt their thinking to match their tools. Congratulations, Colthus announced. You've survived the elimination phase. Now your real education begins." Elena looked around at her remaining competitors. Silthak had learned to use his enhanced strength for stability, rather than relying on computer-assisted targeting. Orcs had developed techniques for estimating range using visual cues. A newcomer named Veltar, a quiet serpentine, had demonstrated an intuitive understanding of environmental factors that rivaled Elena's own. They were no longer a collection of enhanced individuals trying to prove their superiority. They had become a team of specialists learning to excel under impossible conditions, but Elena knew that the most important lesson was yet to come. The hegemony had made the mistake of thinking that fighting without technology was simply a matter of learning different techniques. What they hadn't understood was that true effectiveness in such conditions required a fundamental change in how one approached warfare itself. The difference between a technician and a predator wasn't in the tools they used. It was in how they thought about the hunt. The final phase of training took place in the Omega Sector, a region of space where experimental quantum interference generators created conditions identical to hegemony-controlled zones. Elena and the 5 remaining candidates were transported to a massive asteroid facility that had been converted into the most realistic combat training environment in the galaxy. "Welcome to Hell," Master Sergeant Kolthis announced as their transport docked. "For the next month, you'll be operating under full quantum suppression. No enhanced targeting, no computer assistance, no cybernetic interfaces. If you can't do it with your own eyes and hands, it doesn't get done." Elena felt a familiar thrill as they disembarked into the facility. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and ozone, but underneath was something else. The scent of fear and determination that marked places where warriors were forged. This was where she would discover if her skills could truly match the galactic elite. The first exercise was deceptively simple. Eliminate a single target at extreme range while under simulated combat conditions. The twist was that the target was defended by automated systems that weren't affected by quantum interference, forcing the sniper to remain undetected while making an impossible shot. Elena watched as Silthak attempted the mission first. The massive Kethrin had adapted well to manual targeting, but his enhanced physiology worked against him in this scenario. His size made concealment difficult, and his movements, while incredibly strong, weren't subtle enough for the delicate positioning required. Orcs tried next, using his species' natural camouflage abilities to approach the target zone. But without his electromagnetic vision, he miscalculated the range and his shot went wide, triggering the automated defenses and ending his attempt. Veltar, the quiet serpentine, came closest to success. Her natural flexibility allowed her to take shooting positions that would have been impossible for the other candidates, and her patience served her well in the stalking phase. But when the moment came for the shot, she hesitated, second-guessing herself without her usual technological confirmation. When Elena's turn came, she approached the problem differently. Instead of trying to adapt enhanced abilities to the situation, she treated it like a hunting expedition in the Colorado wilderness. She spent hours studying the target area, noting patrol patterns, identifying wind patterns from the movement of atmospheric processors, and finding a shooting position that offered both concealment and the angle she needed. Her shot, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. One moment the target was there, the next it wasn't. The automated defenses never detected her presence. "Explain your approach," Kolthis demanded during the debrief. "Patience," Elena replied simply. "Most of my competitors tried to force the shot to work from positions that were convenient or comfortable. I waited until conditions were perfect." "The mission parameters allowed only a 4-hour window," Silthak protested. "You used nearly 3 hours just positioning yourself." Elena nodded. "Because a rushed shot is a missed shot. Better to take one perfect shot than 3 good ones." The exercises escalated in complexity over the following weeks. Multi-target scenarios where precise timing was essential. Moving platform engagements where both sniper and target were in motion. Hostage situations where millimeter precision meant the difference between rescue and tragedy. What became clear was that Elena's approach to these challenges was fundamentally different from her competitors. They were trying to replicate their enhanced capabilities through alternative means. Elena was drawing on hunting instincts that had been refined over thousands of years of human evolution. "You think like prey," she explained to Veltar during one of their rare rest periods. That's not an insult. Most intelligent species evolved as prey animals. You think about avoiding danger, finding safe positions, minimizing risk. Veltar's scales shifted to an interested pattern. And humans? We think like persistence hunters, Elena replied. We don't avoid danger, we use it. We don't look for safe positions, we create killing grounds. We don't minimize risk, we transfer it to our enemies. This distinction became crucial as the final exercise approached. Admiral Kethamara herself announced the scenario: a simulated assassination mission against a heavily defended hegemony command post. The target was protected by multiple layers of security, both technological and personnel. The quantum interference made electronic surveillance useless, forcing the sniper to rely entirely on fieldcraft and marksmanship. This is not a test, the Admiral warned. This is a mission rehearsal. Intelligence suggests that we'll need to conduct exactly this type of operation within weeks. Your performance here will determine whether the mission proceeds. Elena felt the weight of that responsibility as she studied the target facility. It was a masterpiece of defensive engineering, designed by minds that understood how to neutralize technological advantages. Multiple redundant guard positions, overlapping fields of fire, and constantly changing patrol routes made approach seem impossible. But as she watched the facility for days, Elena began to see patterns that her competitors missed. The hegemony had trained their forces well, but they had trained them systematically. Their patrol routes, while appearing random, followed logical progressions. Their guard positions, while well placed tactically, were positioned according to doctrine rather than intuition. Most importantly, Elena realized, they were defending against the kind of technological assault they expected from Galactic command forces. They had prepared for orbital bombardments, electronic warfare, and mass infantry assaults. They hadn't prepared for a single predator who thought like their ancient ancestors. Elena's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to find a way through the defenses, she would wait for the defenses to create an opportunity for her. Every fortress had a weakness, and that weakness was usually routine. She positioned herself not at the optimal shooting location, but at a position where she could monitor the facility's patterns for 72 hours straight. Her competitors thought she was wasting time. Elena knew she was gathering intelligence that no computer could provide. On the third night, she found what she was looking for: a shift change that created a 17-second window where the target would be visible from a location the guards considered impossible to reach. The shot would require threading a bullet through a gap smaller than a human fist at a range of nearly 2 kilometers, compensating for atmospheric interference that changed by the minute. When Elena finally took the shot, it was with the same calm precision that had marked every kill of her career. The bullet flew true, eliminating the target with surgical precision before the guards even realized they were under attack. Impossible, breathed Nexar as they reviewed the footage afterward. The angle was mathematically impossible from any position the guards could observe. The guards were looking for threats from positions that made tactical sense, Elena replied. I shot from a position that was tactically ridiculous but ballistically perfect. Admiral Kethamara studied the data for a long moment. You spent 3 days in position without moving more than a few meters. Most snipers would have developed muscle fatigue that would affect accuracy. Elena shrugged. My grandfather taught me to hunt deer in the Rocky Mountains. Sometimes you wait all day for a 10-second opportunity. This was the same thing, just with higher stakes. The exercise concluded with Elena being declared the top graduate of the program, but she knew that the real test was yet to come. The training had been preparation for actual combat operations against an enemy that had already proven capable of neutralizing the galaxy's most advanced military forces. As the candidates prepared to return to active duty, Kalthus pulled Elena aside for a private conversation. You've changed how we think about this war, he said quietly. Before you arrived, we were trying to find technological solutions to a technological problem. You've shown us that sometimes the answer is to stop thinking technologically altogether. Elena nodded, but her thoughts were already focused on what lay ahead. The hegemony had made a crucial mistake in their strategy. They had assumed that neutralizing Galactic Command's technological advantages would level the playing field. What they hadn't considered was that some warriors didn't need technological advantages to be deadly. They had forgotten that before there were computers and targeting systems and cybernetic enhancements, there were predators who killed with nothing but skill, patience, and the will to survive. The galaxy was about to rediscover what that meant. 2 weeks after graduation, Elena found herself aboard the battle cruiser Vengeance, heading toward the contested Xerian system, where hegemony forces had established a forward command base. The ship's briefing room buzzed with tension as Admiral Kithmara outlined the mission that would test everything Elena had learned. Intelligence indicates that Marshal Vexithol, the hegemony's supreme military commander, will be visiting the Xerian base for a strategic conference, the Admiral explained. This represents our best opportunity to decapitate their command structure and potentially end this war. Elena studied the holographic displays showing the target facility. It was even more heavily fortified than the training scenarios, with multiple layers of defense and thousands of troops. The base had been constructed inside a massive asteroid, with only a few small docking ports providing access to the interior. The quantum interference field extends for light minutes around the base, Admiral Kithmara continued. Our ships can't get close enough for orbital bombardment, and any assault force would be detected long before reaching effective range. This mission requires a single operative who can infiltrate undetected and eliminate the target. Commander Zixth, who had initially opposed Elena's selection for the program, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. With respect, Admiral, sending one soldier against an entire fortified base seems optimistic. Elena noticed that several other officers nodded agreement, but Admiral Kithmara's expression remained confident. Perhaps, but conventional tactics have failed against the hegemony. It's time to try something unconventional. The infiltration plan was complex in its simplicity. Elena would be deployed via stealth pod to a mining asteroid several million kilometers from the target base. From there, she would use a modified exploration vessel to approach the hegemony facility disguised as a routine supply transport. The quantum interference will prevent them from conducting detailed scans of your vessel, the mission planner explained. But it will also prevent you from using any electronic systems for navigation or targeting. You'll be operating completely blind once you enter the interference zone. Elena nodded, understanding. This was exactly the type of mission she had trained for, one where technological superiority meant nothing and success depended entirely on skill and determination. The journey to the deployment point took 3 days, during which Elena made final preparations for what could easily be a suicide mission. She stripped her equipment down to essentials: her custom rifle, 200 rounds of ammunition, basic survival gear, and a combat knife that had belonged to her grandfather. No electronics, no smart systems, nothing that could be compromised by quantum interference. The stealth pod deployment went flawlessly, and Elena found herself alone on a barren asteroid, with only the mining facility's automated systems for company. The exploration vessel she would use for the final approach was little more than a metal shell with basic life support, primitive by galactic standards, but perfect for her needs. The 3-day journey to the hegemony base was an exercise in controlled tension. Elena had to navigate by stellar position and dead reckoning, techniques that hadn't been used for centuries. When she finally approached the base's outer perimeter, she was exactly where she needed to be, a testament to navigation skills learned from human explorers who had crossed Earth's oceans using nothing but stars and intuition. The hegemony guards, as predicted, assumed her vessel was a routine supply transport. The quantum interference prevented detailed scans, and Elena's approach vector matched that used by regular cargo haulers. She was waved through 3 security checkpoints without question. Docking inside the asteroid base, Elena marveled at the engineering that had created this fortress. Tunnels carved through solid rock connected vast chambers that housed everything from barracks to command centers. The base could accommodate tens of thousands of troops and was virtually impregnable against conventional assault. But Elena wasn't planning a conventional assault. She was hunting. Moving through the base's service corridors dressed in stolen maintenance coveralls, Elena began the patient process of stalking her prey. Marshal Vexthal was somewhere in this maze of tunnels, and Elena had to find him without being detected by thousands of enemy soldiers. She spent 6 hours learning the base's rhythms, identifying patrol patterns and shift changes. The hegemony forces were disciplined and alert, but they were watching for external threats, not an infiltrator who was already inside their perimeter. Elena's hunting instincts, refined through years of training and enhanced by genetic memory stretching back to humanity's earliest predators, guided her through the base's corridors. She moved when patrols were distracted, hid when necessary, and slowly worked her way toward the command section where intelligence suggested the marshal would be meeting with his staff. Finding the conference room was relatively easy. It was the most heavily guarded location in the base. What wasn't easy was finding a shooting position that would allow her to eliminate the target and escape afterward. Elena spent another 4 hours studying the area, noting guard positions, escape routes, and potential complications. The conference room was deep inside the asteroid, accessible only through heavily defended corridors. Any conventional sniper position would be a death trap, but Elena had stopped thinking conventionally weeks ago. Instead of looking for a position near the conference room, she found one that seemed impossible. A maintenance shaft that ran parallel to the room at a distance of nearly 800 meters. The shaft was too small for normal infiltration, too far for accurate shooting, and completely unguarded because no one considered it a threat. Elena spent 12 hours working her way through the cramped maintenance tunnel, moving inches at a time to avoid making noise that might alert security systems. When she finally reached her chosen position, she was exhausted, dehydrated, and covered in the grime of industrial systems. But she had achieved the impossible. A clear line of sight to the conference room where Marshal Vexthul would be meeting with his commanders. The shot, when it came, was the culmination of everything Elena had learned about precision under pressure. Nearly 800 meters through an opening barely larger than her bullet, accounting for atmospheric variations in an enclosed space, compensating for her own fatigue and stress. The bullet flew true, striking Marshal Vexthul in the center of his chest and eliminating the hegemony's supreme commander in front of his entire staff. Before the guards could even begin to search for the shooter, Elena was already moving through the maintenance systems toward her escape route. The confusion that followed was everything Elena had hoped for. The death of their supreme commander threw the hegemony forces into chaos. Some units tried to secure the base, others began searching for infiltrators, and still others attempted to contact their superiors for orders that would never come. Elena used this confusion to reach her hidden vessel and escape the base before anyone realized how the assassination had been accomplished. By the time hegemony investigators found the maintenance shaft she had used, Elena was already beyond the quantum interference field and transmitting her mission success signal to the waiting Galactic command fleet. The death of Marshal Vexthul marked the beginning of the end for the hegemony. Without their supreme commander's tactical genius, their forces became disorganized and predictable. The technological advantages they had gained through quantum interference meant nothing when their leadership structure collapsed. But for Elena, the mission represented something more than a tactical victory. She had proven that human hunting instincts, refined through millions of years of evolution, could triumph over any technological advantage when properly applied. The galaxy had rediscovered the power of the predator. 6 months after the assassination of Marshal Vexthul, Elena stood before the Galactic Command's highest military tribunal, not as a defendant, but as the architect of a revolution in military thinking. The war with the hegemony had ended 3 weeks earlier when their remaining forces surrendered after losing 7 more high-value targets to what intelligence reports were calling impossible shots. Admiral Kethmara presented Elena with the galaxy's highest military honor, the Star of Valor, in a ceremony attended by representatives from every member species. But Elena knew the real recognition wasn't the medal. It was the change in how galactic military doctrine was being rewritten. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all configurations, Admiral Kethmara addressed the assembled crowd. We gather today not just to honor an exceptional warrior, but to acknowledge a fundamental shift in how we understand warfare itself. Elena stood at attention as the Admiral continued, but her thoughts were on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the mocking laughter of her first day at Nexus Station, to standing as the galaxy's most feared sniper, she had proven that human instincts could compete with any technological enhancement. For centuries, we have pursued military advancement through technology, Admiral Kethmara continued. Bigger weapons, smarter systems, more sophisticated enhancements. We forgot that warfare is ultimately about one mind defeating another, one will overcoming another's resistance. The audience included many of the officers who had initially dismissed Elena as primitive. Commander Zixith sat in the front row, his crystalline features reflecting the complex emotions of someone whose fundamental beliefs had been shattered and rebuilt. The other candidates from the sniper program were there as well, now serving as instructors in the new human doctrine training programs being established across the galaxy. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez didn't just eliminate high-value targets, the Admiral explained. She eliminated our preconceptions about what makes a warrior effective. She showed us that the most sophisticated weapon is useless without the mind to guide it properly. Elena's success had triggered a complete reevaluation of military recruitment and training. Every species was now examining their own evolutionary heritage, looking for the predatory instincts that had made their ancestors successful hunters. The Kethran were rediscovering the persistence hunting techniques their species had used before civilization. The Vextai were learning to trust their electromagnetic senses without computer enhancement. Even the mechanical crystalline beings were developing new combat doctrines based on their unique perspectives. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. No longer were humans seen as the primitive newcomers who had stumbled into galactic civilization. They were recognized as the carriers of something precious that more advanced species had lost: the ability to think like predators when survival was at stake. The hegemony made a crucial error, Admiral Kethmara observed. They assumed that neutralizing our technology would reduce us to their level. They didn't understand that some of us had never abandoned the skills that made our species effective before technology existed. Elena reflected on the missions that had followed the assassination of Marshal Vexthal. Each one had been designed to be impossible, and each one had succeeded because she approached them not as technological problems to be solved, but as hunts to be executed with patience and precision. The siege of Kronos Station, where she had eliminated 3 hegemony commanders from a range of 5 kilometers using a rifle that shouldn't have been accurate beyond 2. The defense of New Geneva, where she had held off an entire assault force by creating a killing field that channeled enemy movements into predetermined zones. The infiltration of the hegemony research facility, where she had gathered intelligence that revealed their quantum interference technology could be disrupted by precisely timed electromagnetic pulses. Each success had built on the last, creating a reputation that eventually became as much a weapon as her rifle. Hegemony forces began to fear the ghost sniper who could strike from impossible positions and vanish without a trace. Their paranoia disrupted their operations as much as her actual eliminations. Today, we established the Human Combat Training Institute, Admiral Kethmara announced, bringing Elena's attention back to the ceremony. This facility will teach the hunting techniques that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has demonstrated to volunteers from every species in the Galactic Command. Elena felt a mix of pride and concern at this announcement. The techniques she used were effective precisely because they were intuitive to humans. Teaching them to other species would require fundamental changes in how those species thought about warfare. But she had seen evidence that such adaptation was possible. Veltar, the quiet serpentine from her training class, had developed her own version of Elena's patient stalking techniques. Silthak had learned to use his enhanced strength not for brute force, but for the kind of subtle positioning that allowed perfect shots from imperfect positions. The Institute will be commanded by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Admiral Kethmara continued, who is hereby promoted to the rank of colonel and granted authority to develop training programs that emphasize adaptability over technology. Elena accepted the promotion with the same calm dignity she had shown throughout her career, but privately, she was excited by the opportunity. Teaching other species to think like human hunters would be the ultimate test of whether her techniques could truly revolutionize galactic warfares. The ceremony concluded, and the assembled dignitaries dispersed. Elena found herself alone with Admiral Kethmara and Master Sergeant Kolthis. "Any regrets about your gamble on human potential?" Kolthis asked the Admiral with a slight smile. Admiral Kethmara's expression was thoughtful. "On the contrary, I'm beginning to think we've only scratched the surface of what humans can teach us about warfare. Rodriguez has shown us that the most advanced weapon is a trained mind operating without technological crutches." Elena nodded acknowledgement, but her thoughts were already focused on the challenges ahead. Training other species to think like human predators would require understanding not just the techniques, but the mindset that made those techniques effective. There's something else, Admiral Kethmara added. Intelligence suggests that other hostile factions have been studying the hegemony's defeat. They're developing countermeasures to our new tactics. Elena smiled, and for just a moment both officers caught a glimpse of the predator that had made her so effective. Let them, she said quietly. They're still thinking like prey. They're trying to defend against techniques they don't understand, developed by minds that think differently than theirs. She paused, looking out at the stars visible through the station's massive viewport. Humans have been adapting to overcome superior opponents for millions of years. It's what we do. Every time someone develops a defense against our current methods, we evolve new ones. Admiral Kethmara followed her gaze to the stars. And you believe this evolutionary advantage is teachable? Elena considered the question seriously. The techniques are teachable. The mindset, that's more complex, but I've seen evidence that other species can adapt their thinking when survival depends on it. She turned back to face the Admiral. The key is helping them understand that warfare isn't about having the best weapons or the most advanced technology. It's about understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves, and using that knowledge to put them in situations where their advantages become liabilities. As Elena left the ceremony to begin her new role as an instructor, she carried with her the knowledge that she had fundamentally changed how an entire galaxy thought about warfare. The techniques she had learned hunting deer in the Colorado mountains had become the foundation for a new military doctrine that would shape conflicts for generations to come. But perhaps more importantly, she had proven that humanity's place in the galactic community wasn't as the primitive newcomers who needed to catch up to more advanced species. Humans were the carriers of ancient wisdom that more technologically advanced civilizations had forgotten in their rush toward ever greater sophistication. The galaxy had spent centuries trying to eliminate the predator from warfare. Elena Rodriguez had reminded them why that was impossible. In any conflict, someone had to hunt and someone had to be hunted. Humans had never forgotten which role they preferred.